And now on the line is Michelle Murphy from Social Justice Ireland. Michelle, welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much, Darren.
Michelle, we're going to talk today about your annual Sustainable Progress Index that you published last week. I covered your reports and interviews with you in 2019 and 2020, the latter just before the COVID restrictions, but I didn't cover your report last year in the main because of the COVID situation. As this is our first interview on your report in 2 years, Michelle, could you remind our listeners on the RFM to the background to this report, and then tell us a bit about this year's report, please?
Absolutely, Darren. And just to say thanks for all the support in covering, the report over a number of years. So what the Sustainable Progress is, it measures the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So it measures how Ireland is doing on them, but then 13 other comparable EU countries. Now, it used to be 14, but seeing as the UK has left the EU now, we just measure the EU 14. So it compares us against our peers. So we look at 87 different indicators across the 17 goals, so a mix of European indicators, the UN indicators. So you're able to compare and contrast how countries are doing. And what we do is we group them into three. So we give an overall score. So this year Ireland ranks 10th out of the 14 countries, but we also group it into three sections. So we have a social index looking at the SDGs that relate to social issues, the environmental index looking at all the environmental SDGs, and then the economy index looking at the SDGs that relate to the economy, and we give separate scores on those as well.
So we're coming 10th out of 14th overall, so we're not doing very good, aren't we now?
No, we're not, and we've never actually gotten above that in any of the years that we've done the report, Darren. And so we come 10th overall on the social index. We come 8th on the environmental index. We come 9th, and on the economic index we come 9th as well. So I mean, what that shows is really, even though we have made some progress on the environmental side, with publishing the climate action plan and some of the things that have gone through, the problem is we're so far behind those other countries, and so they're always just that step ahead of us, because they're starting off at a better place, and they're also doing a bit more than we are. And the economy ranking is surprising enough too, that we're only 9, but what we look at here, it's not just GDP growth and economic growth, but we also look at the incidence of low pay across the countries, the number of young people not in employment, education or training, looking at research and development, the percentage of GDP devoted to that, and we actually scored second lowest on that. And we also score very badly in terms of logistics, transport and broadband capacity, so that's what really drags us down there. And I mean, that's no surprise to anyone, it really.
And we're one of the worst countries in the world for cost of living, aren't we?
Yes, we are, and the cost of living here, even before the sort of increase in inflation we've seen in the past year, we've consistently been high, because prior to the increases in energy costs, it was the cost of housing that was, one of the key drivers of the cost of living. So what you have now is the cost of housing is obviously incredibly high, increasing. The cost of energy, fuel is rising and has been rising, and also, but the cost of food is also rising as well. And what that means is the cost of living is rising for everyone, but it's impacting most on people on low incomes and people who live in rural areas, because they spend a greater proportion of their incomes on energy and food than people on higher incomes. So it's having a really negative impact on people on low incomes.
I remember a couple of years ago, the government, I think it was the Minister for International Development, said something about taking all the government departments in Ireland, taking on board the SDGs and incorporating the targets within their departments. Has that actually happened, do you know, Michelle?
Well, they're certainly being incorporated. So if you look at any of the new plans that have been published, so the Action Plan for Social Inclusion and various other plans, they do sort of reflect the SDGs, or what at least they try and do is they match up the a relevant SDG to a target. But that's not necessarily to say that the SDGs are being fully incorporated. It just means, I suppose, that they're being acknowledged in government policy. However, there is across a group convened by Senator Alice Mary Higgins, I suppose, an an all-Oireachtas group, which is members from every party and independents who are, look at the SDGs and try and reflect the SDGs within their committee work, which I think is really positive. But on a government level, yes, I suppose you see the SDGs badged in, policies, but whether or not they're being fully integrated, I think time will tell. And there's a lot of work going on now on a well-being framework for the country that the government are looking at. So I suppose looking at not just economic issues, but social and environmental issues, health issues, and how that impacts us all. And I suppose that the SDGs would be a really important piece of that. So we hope to see that progressed further. But I suppose this report would tell us that really the SDGs aren't as embedded as policy making as they should be, because if they were, then we'd be scoring higher.
Okay, the next government budget will be announced in just over 6 months' time. Can you tell me, Michelle, the main things you are calling for in that budget to help achieve the UN global goals? And also, can you tell me some of the things you are calling for more immediately?
Well, I suppose in terms of the immediate terms, we have been looking for government to support people in terms of the cost of living, and what we looked for in advance of the cost of living measures that were announced was an increase in social welfare rates, refundable tax credits to be made refundable, and the social welfare rates to be benchmarked to 27.5% of core average earnings. Now, this didn't happen. We were very disappointed because those measures that I just said, they target people on low incomes. And what you actually saw was when the package was announced, over 300 and I think almost 370 million of that package went on the universal energy credit, which is not at all targeted, but the people who are being most impacted are people on low incomes and rural dwellers. So we were disappointed there, and we would like to see some progress on that. But looking to the budget, Darren, and the SDGs, I suppose we'd be looking at some progress and things like I mentioned. Why do we have such a low level of investment in research and development? Tackling the issue of low pay. We have a very high instance of low pay. Supporting young people who aren't in employment, education, or training. We score very well on education, but we don't score well on gender equality. We don't score well on poverty and inequality overall, and we actually score very, very poorly on hunger. Not necessarily because of what you would automatically think. It's due to the, I suppose, low levels of organic farming, the high cost of sort of fruit and vegetable and nutritious food in comparison to other food, junk food, and also the very high levels of obesity. So we'd be looking at some progress there, and we'd be also looking at, obviously, the environmental area is again the area where we're pretty weak in terms of our performance. So affordable energy, climate action, sort of responsible consumption, production, those are the kind of areas government really should be focusing on in Budget 2023 if they're going to improve their score for the Sustainable Progress Index for next year.